Alrighty, what's up, everybody? This is Marshall Couture, also known as Plex, and you're listening to the Escape Artist Podcast, episode 89, A Student of Story. How you like that? I actually know the title and everything for once. So, man, just a little frustrating. I was trying to get this thing working, doing Google Hangouts, and for some reason, didn't want to work, so we shall see how this works. This episode is hopefully going to be a little bit of a quicker episode. Sorry I didn't get one out last week. I do want to get this out every week, once a week at least, but finding time to do that is a little more challenging than I expected. I figured that I can have some time to do that kind of thing on the weekends. But lo and behold, that hasn't worked out so well. So we shall see. But yeah, I'm going to be having some interviews and stuff coming up. It's definitely something I'm looking forward to doing. So yeah, I'm also going to be sketching a little bit while I do this. Just working on my 100 Days of Comics stuff, which I already did about 15 to 20 minutes of today. But I need to get at least a half an hour in, and I have to do some double duty stuff, because time and stuff is not always on my side. Even though the Rolling Stones would beg to differ. So that's what I'm doing. So yeah, how are you guys doing? I don't know why I asked that, because you can't really answer, can you? I mean, unless you come to the live Google Hangouts to do it, to check out the podcast, which I don't know if it's actually on YouTube right now, because yes, I have it going live, but I have it on private. But I don't know if that just means, it posts private or what. So I'm going to actually go check that out right now, see if it's actually live and online. I don't think it is. Nope. So this one's not live. I mean, it's live, but it's not live, I guess. So people aren't going to be able to comment real time, which is fine, because I'm not trying to do that this time. It was fun to do last time, though. So yeah, the idea today is a student of story. And if you do, say, just to go back on what I was talking about before, the fact that I wasn't able to get one out last week. If you want to hear my thoughts on what's going on and stuff, and you're missing it, and for some reason I haven't done it, I am doing 100 Days of Comics right now. So check out my YouTube channel, which is at Marsh Makes Art, just like everything else. Well, actually, it's not. The one thing that isn't at Marsh Makes Art is YouTube. YouTube is Complex Locust, which is a pain in the butt, but you can find the link easily if you go to marshmakesart.com and just click it, or in the show notes here, you can check that out too. So there's a lot of thoughts, because I'm doing 100 Days of Comics every day. So I do like 10-15 minute videos every day and get into my thoughts on the day of just what's going on art wise. A little different than the podcast, but if you're interested in hearing more from me, that's one way to do it. So today is day 11 of making comics for 100 days. So I'm getting there. Got a good start going. Hopefully I can make it through the full 100, because I failed the first time when I tried it. So we shall see. But I mean, the goal is to work a half an hour a day on my projects every single day this year anyways. So it's just, an extension of that anyways. So should be able to get through it and get to it. So speaking about get to it, let's get to this episode. All right. So as you may know, recently I have been working on comics. The comic idea that I'm working on right now is 12 stories. Again, much more detail if you go check out the videos that I've been doing. So, but just the basic idea that is, it's a 12-story building, and it's an apartment building, and each story has one apartment in like a city area. And so each story will have a story, like a written comic book story, written and drawn comic book story. And then each one of those stories will be about 5 pages more or less. So that's the basic gist of it, and I'm going to try to have it all connected and all that. And speaking about all that, somebody, I think it might have been Mike Emirates, suggested that I check out Will Eisner's book, The Building. So I went on Amazon and grabbed it because it's kind of got a similar thing. And I have a lot to talk about as far as Will Eisner. I think I'm going to do a full video just on my experiences with that. But, if you're watching the video, you can see the book I'm holding up, The Building by Will Eisner. And let's see, does it have page numbers? Yeah, it does. So it looks like it's about a 78 page story-ish. And wow, it's absolutely beautifully illustrated. I can already tell the storytelling is great, amazing. I just can't wait to read it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So I guess, I was suggested to read this because it's, got a similar idea to what I'm doing with the 12 Stories book. And I've been wanting to understand why everybody loves Will Eisner because I was reading some of the Spirit stories and I wasn't really digging them too much. But this I can tell I'm going to love. It's just the storytelling is amazing. And I think the difference between his graphic novels and his, newspaper comics is probably a big one from what I can tell. I mean, I have a lot to learn, so we shall see. But yeah, this is beautifully illustrated. It makes me excited to read it, even though it's not like comic books and supernatural craziness. And I mean, I think there is some supernatural elements actually in this, but like it's not like, it makes just everyday life stuff look super interesting. And yeah, so I don't know. I'm looking forward to reading that. So, as far as being a student of story, as you probably know, I I'm learning, how to. That's what this whole comic, 12 stories is. It's an exercise. I mean, it's something I want to make as a product, but it's also an exercise of like how to learn how to write stories and learn how to make comics better. Um, so it's kind of a way to kind of quick start that or whatever, kickstart that. And so I've been wanting to obviously learn how to write stories. So um, I've been doing a lot of research as well, podcasts, books, anything I can get my hands on, little articles and stuff online, and to understand how stories work. Um, and one thing that I think is interesting is I set out to learn how stories work, and came to some interesting conclusions, or at least understandings that I don't know that I expected. Um, so one of the resources that I've been really getting into is one that was suggested by Eddie Crosby. Um, so thank you, Eddie, for that. And it's this podcast called Story Punch, and I've been really digging it, really loving it, having a blast catching up with all of them, and I've almost listened to all of them so far. Really good resource. Almost every episode is a specific topic on storytelling, and I think it's a good reference. Like when I come to a certain spot and I think, oh, you know what, I need to brush up on how villains work, or how you know certain elements in story work, like character arcs or whatever. There's I can go back to one of his podcasts and get a really good overview to understand it a little better. So I'm really happy to check for that podcast, and I'll put that in the show notes for you guys to check out. And so, I kind of set out specifically, okay, I'm writing this book, and it's all about, I want to do better job at writing than I have in the past with comics. And so I need to figure out the story stuff. How does it work? What's going on? And I have listened to a specific audio book that is, one of the probably more well-known audio book or books or whatever on the topic, which is, by Robert McKee. And it's just called Story, and it's, I guess, about screenwriting, but it's really just, universal pretty much, I would say. And so that was like probably when I first, a long time ago, started trying to investigate how story works. That was like, what I read and checked out. And I think I've talked about it. I'm sure I've talked about it on the podcast here before. But he's kind of very opinionated, comparatively to other stuff I've listened to, and he's kind of talks about like almost a set way. He deals a little more with absolutes than most other content I take in, and which I don't have the same issue with absolutes that a lot of people do. I think there is a such thing as absolutes, but I certainly don't think that everything is as cut and dry as some people wish it was. And you know there's so many factors that people don't factor in sometimes when they develop their opinions and things. So I'm definitely open to getting a better understanding and empathy towards all kinds of situations. So anyways, that's like a little tangent, but um so his stuff, and especially when it comes to creative stuff, it's like there's no one way to do everything, and he kind of puts in that book, kind of puts it out there almost as if this is the way it works, and everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about, type of thing. There's definitely kind of a thing there. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but that's kind of what I got from it. So what that does is makes it a little bit discouraging, actually. So, because it's like, well, I don't know if I quite feel comfortable doing certain things the way he's prescribing and things. So, um, one thing is I think I remember from that book, he describes, and I gotta re-listen to it, because I'm not saying that it's not a good book to learn from. It is, but I would suggest you know spitting out the bones, type of thing. Keeping the good stuff, and trying not to get hung up on some of his more opinionated stuff, parts of it. So he talks about, well, what is story? And I think what I remember, if I remember correctly, he was basically making the case that story is a character, the main character developing, what change does he or she go through that, you know, that brings him, makes him different than he was in the beginning, and it's got to be like a dramatic change. Um, which I think is a very important element in story, of course, absolutely. But I think he was making the case that if that doesn't happen, then it's not actually a story. It's an anecdote or a vignette or something like that. It's just saying some things that happened that's maybe interesting, but not actually a story. So, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe not. But so I also put that, into Google search, what makes a story, because I'm trying to learn as much as I can, because I want to make sure I actually make in these little 12 short story things. I want to make it, I'm trying to learn how story works, so I want to do it right, um, so I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do like a vignette type of thing, which is very tempting to do when you're going for a shorter piece. And when I say vignette, I think kind of like Twilight Zone or something like that, where you have a short story and there's like a twist at the end and that kind of thing. And that's, and I definitely, as I'm writing all these stories, I am kind of feeling like that's what I'm doing in a lot of cases, not in every case, but in some cases, I am kind of going that route. So that was a little discouraging, but it doesn't matter because I'm continuing to learn, and stuff like that. So, going through the stuff from Story Punch, I'm learning a ton of stuff, like I was saying, and you know, I get to, I've learned so much, and it's hard to really put like, tackle everything I've learned, and I don't think I can. I wrote some show notes down, or some notes down, or whatever, to hit a couple little points, but nothing like super, super general. Um, but, one thing, there was one episode, there's a couple episodes that are super inspiring and interesting, but there was one episode he was talking about the idea of stories as marketing, which, okay, so kind of what got me on this path was reading the book Invisible Ink. And there's different methods of how you can approach creating a story. One of them would be, kind of just free writing a whole bunch of stuff and then kind of cutting back, um, kind of like you would with, a block of marble, and you would create a sculpture out of that. But the way that, Invisible Ink talks about it, it's more this kind of sculpture where you create an armature and it's more additive, and you add pieces of clay. And there is some subtractive, you put a hunk of clay on the arm, and then you got to, pull away a little bit to get the muscles, but it can be a lot more efficient that way. And so the theme would be the armature. And so it focuses a lot on theme. What are you trying to say, in the story, and stuff like that. So um, it's just a different way of looking at it. So, that's the way I'm kind of approaching. I'm approaching 12 stories, is I'm trying to go theme first, and do the more, what I think is possibly the more efficient way. Although I don't think the other way is a bad way either. Like, that's inspirational too, because that's kind of the NaNoWriMo idea, where you just write. however many thousand words every day, and then you don't worry about editing or anything at first, and then you go back and through the editing you create the finished story. And I like that idea as well. But being a person with very small amount of quote unquote bandwidth, which basically, you know, means time usually to get into too much craziness. Uh, you know, I'm interested in what might be a more efficient, way. So that being said, I'm trying out this invisible ink type of idea and seeing how that works. And maybe it won't work. Maybe I'll end up going more for the other way. Um, but that being said, that's just like an overview of kind of the idea there, but with invisible ink. But and I'll put the link in the show notes for that book. Most people probably, I mean, it's a really good popular book, so you might have already read it, but I'll put the link in there. So as I'm learning and stuff and listening to Story Punch now, he kind of thinks of it different ways, and I need to check out the guy's name the guy who does Story Punch, because I'm kind of sitting here and acting like, you know, referencing him and not even saying his name. So let me type that in and see if I could find that. Story Punch Podcast. His website, storypunchpodcast.com, is where you can get, all the links to the different feeds and such. So, I mean, I can just link to that, but let's see. Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna say there's gotta be like a about section, right? Episodes, essays, where to start, share your about Story Punch, of course, the first one. Podcast seeks. Who's in charge? Mark Madrigal. That's right. That sounds familiar. So, and that's Mark with a C, M-A-R-C, which is interesting. Very different than I'm used to seeing it, I should say. So let me get back to my reference picture. Okay. I'm drawing cats. That's the first story I'm working on. Is a story called Here Kitty for the 12 Stories sort of anthology type of thing. So, all right. So as I'm reading or listening to the Story Punch podcast, a lot of cool info there. One thing that was interesting though is, so in Invisible Ink, at the end of the book, or close to the end, he is talking about that writing stories is good business. And I know that sounds kind of crass, but that kind of perked my ears, because I'm like, I do want to make a living doing this stuff. I would love to. So, I was like, okay, I kind of like that idea. But this Mark Madrigal guy had a whole podcast basically refuting the idea of story marketing. And I was like, wow, he made some really good points. I still think, it is good business, but I agree that you certainly can't approach it that way. You can't be like, okay, I'm trying to make money, and people say using story helps you make money. So that's why I'm going to start using story. You can't just, I mean, your intention needs to be, I'm making a story because I have something to say, and if that story does attract, a more business, situation, then cool. And that it does have the power to do stuff like that. So it's just acknowledging that that is a good thing, I think is okay. but approaching it as a marketing tool maybe isn't such a great thing. So he made some good points, and it got me thinking, and kind of made me feel a little bad at first, but then I was like, you know what, makes sense. I'm gonna go with it. Um, so I'm trying to refill this mechanical pencil, and the eraser's not big enough to kind of get out, and I'm trying to do it with my teeth. All right, I got it out. So that was one thing. And then he had another episode where he was talking about creativity and what is creativity, and things like that. And he referenced this talk done by Charlie Kaufman called, it's like a screenwriting lecture, but it's interesting how, and if you don't know Charlie Kaufman, he's the one who wrote and directed like a beautiful, wait, what is it? Oh, like Being John Malkovich and stuff like that, and other stuff like that. I'm not super familiar, like I'm familiar, but I'm not like, I didn't know his name or anything. I knew that movie and other movies that he's made. But I never like, knew what his name was, or that he had done all those movies specifically. But anyways, this talk is interesting because, in this talk, he's like more talking about how weird it is for him to be doing a talk. And he approaches everything with like kind of this sober, realistic kind of, I don't know, authentic approach. And I don't know, it's definitely, I'm gonna put it in the show notes. I recommend you check it out. And he does talk about screenwriting and things like that through it, but he actually makes some really interesting points. So all that being said, what I came to realize through this process is that story is not something you can just pin down and be like, okay, this is what story is. Now I got to hit all these points, and now I have a story. There's no like, this is the structure that every story should be. And I mean, there has been formulaic approaches to story, and in certain situations it has kind of been used in a way that has been celebrated, I should say. I guess I would say, I'm thinking of like probably something like the Saturday morning cartoon type of aspect of story writing, where it's just like, there's a moral to the story, and then it kind of goes through a certain format, and voila, you have a story. And sometimes they're a little bit predictable and things like that. I'm not saying it always is. There are artists, behind these kind of things. But you can see kind of that aspect sometimes being played out, and even in a good way, in an interesting way. And it really depends. Everything depends. There's rules, but then rules can be broken. And so the Mark, I don't know how to say his name. Madrigal or something. He for from story or Madrigal, okay. He he was very adamant against the idea of, story being a business thing. And I get that. It is an art form and you can't just put it in a box like that. And I agree. And basically, I think even before that, I agreed to a certain extent. But, um, the way he exclaimed it was a lot very passionate against the idea of story kind of being a business thing. But, so be how passionate he was kind of made me think a little harder about it. Um, and what it made me do was realize that I can't put story in a box. I can't figure out story and say this is what it is, and then, boom, I have a story, and because I've hit all these points. And it's much better that way. And it's true, even with art, like I just know that it's true just because I'm used to being an artist. And when I'm sitting there making art, I'm not really thinking about the marketing aspects to it or anything. I'm just enjoying making art because I love doing it and I have a certain goal of how I want to share it, and or just what I want to do, and I do it, you know. And so I don't know. I'm realizing that you can't just peg down story. You have to. There's an intuitive process to it. Um, and you don't want to be fully 100% only intuition, but like one of the things that Charlie Kaufman said was, how did I learn how to write stories? Well, I had a lot of movie TV shows and movies and things like that I enjoyed, and I just kind of started writing because I enjoyed certain things and I hit certain aspects because there was an intuitive, aspect to it. And I could tell what works and what didn't just from being a fan of it. And that's so true. I mean, that's how I've approached making my comics. And, you know, I'm now trying to be a little more um thoughtful about how I approach it, because I want to write better stories. But those who have read my Glyph comics have said, they can see what I was getting at, and they really like it. And there's a certain pacing, that is recognizable as, comic book pacing. And they get that I wasn't trying to be like super deep or anything, and that I was just trying to make it a fun comic book adventure. And I was hitting certain points that they recognized, and it was effective, in some instances. And so, I had learned some stuff about story, but when you sit down to make a story, you're not like, you kind of have to, you learn some things, but then you have to kind of throw it all out of the window and just write. I can't be like, while I'm trying to write a story, be like, okay, I got to make sure there's this kind of supporting character, and which act is this that I'm on right now? Am I writing this act correctly? Of the three, act structure, am I, creating the right kind of tension in this moment? I don't know, like all the different aspects that you learn when you start learning about how story works. Do I have a good supporting characters? Am I using this archetype character correctly? All there's so many different things, and it's like when you're writing, you can't think about that too much, or else you'll get stuck in your own head and get paralyzed. I know I will. So, one thing that was tripping me up was like, okay, while I'm writing these little stories, am I getting the three acts in? Are the characters changing enough? Like, is it is it actually a story, or am I just doing like a vignette or whatever? Like, Robert McKee would say, and stuff like that. And I can't think too much about that, or else I'm gonna freak out and not be able to, accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. It's kind of in the creating process. It's kind of a feel thing, but that doesn't mean you can't think about this stuff and be more thoughtful. You have to internalize, the stuff you're learning about story, and then you have to go at it, kind of throw all that stuff out the window, and hopefully some of that stuff stuck to a point where you're starting to do some of this stuff intuitively. And then the only way you can kind of learn is by doing it, repeatedly. And that's kind of, so like, and then kind of evaluate after the fact. I think you learn more about how you write and how writing works for you, and how to create a story. I think you learn more about that after the fact, with hindsight, and finding out what, listening to, other people's reactions and seeing, wow, that worked, and that didn't work. Maybe I need to, do a little learning on how that specific aspect of story works. Again, internalize it, and then next time maybe I'll have a better, idea of what I'm doing, on that specific area. So I don't know. I mean, does that make sense? And what I've learned, and that's why I called this being a student of story, is I thought I could just kind of, get a couple articles, the 10 things you need, to write a story. You need to know before you write your story, or like, some of these articles, story creating checklist type of thing. But it was really hard to pin down, as I was trying to learn. Um, and I've been working on learning this stuff for a few weeks now. I mean, I always have my eye open to it and ears open to it, but purposefully, I've been trying to figure this stuff out for a few weeks now, and I was getting a little frustrated because I couldn't pin down, what is story, and then I had a couple of these podcasts, and I'm like, oh, there's a reason why I can't figure it out. It's not something you really can just pin down. All you can do is hear other people's opinion of what story is, and you know, kind of figure it out on your own type of thing. And so what I realized is I need to become a student of story. I need to realize that this isn't, something where it's one and done and you've figured it out, but it's more something that is going to be a lifelong journey to learn this stuff. Just like art is always, it's already like that. And I kind of knew that for to a certain extent already, but I'm really beginning to understand it, a little more solidly, that it really, I'm not going to be able to figure it out. And what it did was free me up with the stories I'm writing right now. It makes me think, okay, I don't know, I'm not going to understand it fully, and that's okay if I do some, vignettes or whatever, or stuff that's not technically maybe considered a story by some. Just because, Robert McKee doesn't acknowledge it as story, that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't story, or one of these other people. Um, so I don't know. That's kind of what I've learned, and so I'm gonna be a student of story, and I'm gonna be okay with not hitting all the perfectly right points. And through this project, this is, it's okay if I don't succeed in making stories the way they're quote unquote supposed to be made. um what is important is that I'm learning, and beginning to understand how I write stories and how stories work in a way that, affects people and does, what I want it to do, like entertain or educate or whatever, bring empathy. That's one of the things I've learned. A big part of what story is it creates empathy about different subject matter and stuff. So yeah. Yeah. Do you need something? I'm almost okay. I'm almost done. It's my wife. She's doing sorta. Um, my wife is doing videos, her makeup videos and stuff. So that's kind of why I actually had an opportunity to do the podcast and stuff today, and also why I wanted to keep it short because I don't want to be doing this all night long and to work night and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so I mean that's what I've learned basically, and I really would suggest that you check out that Charlie Kaufman. I mean, the stuff I said about that lecture or whatever is just the tip of the iceberg. There was so many good nuggets in there and interesting things. And also check out Story Punch, the podcast. It's really good stuff. And if you've already checked it out, I would say revisit it. It's worth revisiting, for sure. So those will be in the show notes. And again, I'll be I'm shooting for doing these podcasts once a week. But I'm realizing that it's not always easy because I really want to do them at home and have better quality. And that's kind of what's tripping me up a little bit because, finding that time is not always easy. And, when I did them, driving around, it's a lot easier because, I have more time doing that. But I really want better quality. And I also like the idea of doing it on Google Hangouts so that I don't have to upload it to YouTube after the fact because I have to do that. I have to actually edit it in the program and then upload it, and that's just a whole nother thing. And like I said, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm trying to kind of double task or whatever, double duty here, and with all of that. So yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for your patience. And my goal, like I said, is to do one a week. Um, but if I don't, I don't. But that's the goal, and that's what I'm going to keep aiming for. So we should get one a week for the most part. But if we don't, I'll be back probably within a week or so. So I covet your further patience with me on that. And I just really thank you for listening. I think you guys are awesome. I really appreciate the community. Check out the 100 Days of Comics because there's a few people doing it, and it's really inspirational to see other people's process and stuff like that. And it's fun. So yeah, that's about it, guys, for today. And I really appreciate everything. You can find all my stuff at marshmakesart.com. Also, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, now Snapchat as well, Pinterest. All that stuff is under the, Marsh Makes Art name or whatever. So, and you can find all the links at marshmakesart.com if you want just an easy way to just click to it and stuff. So that's about it, guys. Thank you so much, guys and gals, and I'll talk to you on the next Escape Artist podcast. Peace out.